The shelter had already given up on him. No tail wags. No barking. Just silence. He'd been found trembling behind a gas station dumpster, barely breathing. They called him a ghost dog, so shut down, it was like no one was home. But the day that little girl showed up and whispered 6 quiet words through his cage, he ran like he had a purpose. No one could explain it. Not even her. But he did make it. And this is the story of how. The van rolled up just after 7 a.m., engine coughing in the cold January air. The sky was still gray, the snow on the ground tinged brown from traffic and salt. It wasn't unusual for strays to be dropped off without warning, but what startled the shelter staff was the silence. No barking. No scratching. Just a cardboard box with holes poked through the sides. Hannah, the morning supervisor, crouched beside it and lifted the lid slowly. Inside, curled so tightly it looked like he was trying to disappear, was a thin black Labrador mix. His ribs were pronounced beneath a dull, unkempt coat. His eyes didn't move. No growl, no flinch. He didn't even react when she reached for him. "Poor boy," she murmured. "Where did you come from?" She reached into the box carefully and lifted him out. He didn't resist. His body was limp, not from trust, but from a kind of emotional shutdown she had seen before. Dogs that had been too scared for too long. Dogs that had learned silence was safer than crying. They scanned him for a microchip. Nothing. No collar. No tags. Hannah gently set him down in isolation kennel 3, the quietest wing of the shelter. He didn't explore. He didn't sniff. He didn't move. He lay down in the corner, facing the wall, and stayed there. The vet checked him out that afternoon. No major injuries, she noted. But malnourished. And traumatized, clearly. Might have been abandoned a while. Staff began calling him Shadow, both for his pitch-dark coat and the way he moved, silent, slow, like he was fading into the background. They tried everything, soft blankets, toys, even chicken broth. Nothing stirred him. He didn't respond to voices or names. Didn't look when someone walked in. Didn't touch his food unless left alone for hours. By the 3rd day, staff began whispering the unspoken. He might not make it. Not physically, he wasn't terminal, but emotionally. Some dogs shut down so deep they never come back. They fade. And in an overcrowded shelter, those were the hardest cases to justify keeping for long. "He's not aggressive," Hannah defended in a staff meeting. "He's just scared. He needs time." "We don't have time," came the reply. "We're over capacity." Again. Outside the shelter, snow kept falling. It blanketed everything in silence, like the whole world was holding its breath. And inside that kennel, so was Shadow. A week passed. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He didn't connect. Every day, a few people walked through the kennels hoping to adopt, their fingers tapping on the glass, voices squeaky with excitement. "Look at this one. Mom, he's so cute." No one ever looked twice at Shadow. Until the girl came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unusually quiet. A woman walked in, coat fraying at the cuffs, holding a child's hand. The girl looked about 10. Thin. Pale. She walked slowly, dragging her boots just enough to make a soft brushing sound on the floor. "This one," the girl said quietly, pausing outside isolation kennel 3. The woman, her mother, looked confused. "He's not really moving, sweetheart." But the girl didn't step away. She knelt. Her hand slowly slid through the bars and stopped just short of the blanket. And then she whispered something. No one heard what she said. But Shadow moved. Just his ears. A twitch. Then a turn. He turned his head to look at her. Not flinching. Not panicked. Just looking. The first direct eye contact in 10 days. The staff stared in disbelief. Hannah nearly dropped the food bowl in her hand. Shadow got up, unsteady, slow, and took a single step forward. Then another. The girl didn't move. She just whispered again, gently, as if she were speaking to something fragile that might break if she said it too loud. Shadow crossed the kennel and sat in front of her. They looked at each other, both silent. "Can we see him?" the girl asked. The mother blinked. "You want this one?" She nodded. "He's scared. Like me. I think he listens to whispers." Hannah stood frozen in the hallway, still clutching the clipboard she'd been reviewing moments before. Shadow, the dog they'd all silently written off, was now standing. Not shaking. Not pacing. Not panicking. He was focused. The little girl, still kneeling, whispered once more through the kennel bars. Her hand didn't reach out to touch him. She just stayed there, close, but giving him space. "I think he remembers something," she said, turning slightly to face her mother. The mother hesitated. "Maybe he just likes the sound of your voice." "No," the girl said quietly. "It's the words." The mother gave Hannah a questioning glance. Hannah took a breath and approached slowly, crouching beside the girl. "Hi there, what's your name?" "Lena." "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Hannah." "Do you know this dog?" Lena shook her head. "No. But I think he knows me." Hannah tried to process that. "You mean, you've met before?" Lena pressed her fingers to the bar, not touching the dog but almost. "No. But when I said the words, he remembered." "What words, sweetheart?" Lena turned her head slightly, her long brown bangs falling across one eye. "Just something Daddy used to say when I was scared." There was silence for a moment. Hannah didn't push. Shadow was now sitting upright, head tilted toward Lena like he was trying to piece something together. His posture had changed, still cautious, but alert. Present. Later that afternoon, after filling out a visitor's log and confirming they weren't there to adopt that day, Lena and her mother prepared to leave. But Lena walked back toward Isolation Kennel 3 before heading out. "Can I say one more thing?" she asked. Hannah nodded. The girl knelt again, placed her hand softly on the cold kennel glass, and whispered, "Don't give up. You're not broken. Just quiet." Shadow inched closer. Just a few inches. Then he sat again. Then, after a moment, he laid down facing her this time. It was the first time anyone had seen him sleep not curled in defense, but with his chin on his paws, facing outward. Like he was okay letting the world in. Lena smiled. "See? He remembers." The girl and her mother left, and the shelter returned to its quiet hum of barking, mop buckets, and ringing phones. But something had changed in Kennel 3. That night, Shadow ate as soon as food was brought in. He didn't wait for the staff to leave the room. The next morning, he stood up when Hannah entered. No tail wag. Not yet. But his eyes tracked her. That was enough. By the end of the week, Shadow was eating regularly. Still quiet, still slow, but aware. Hannah added a blanket that smelled like lavender. A small toy that squeaked. He nudged it with his nose on day 4. On day 5, he picked it up and moved it to his blanket. Every night, he'd place it beside his paws before lying down. Hannah updated his notes. Progress observed. Tracking human movement. Responds to known voices. Eye contact with staff. No signs of aggression. She paused at the bottom of the form, at the field labeled Adoption Readiness, Yes/No/Monitor. She checked, Monitor. Then, just below it, she added a line. Note, Showed unusual reaction to child visitor. Recommend reconnecting if possible. She didn't have to wait long. Lena and her mother returned the following Tuesday. Hannah greeted them at the desk. "He's doing better," she said. "I think he remembers your visit." Lena smiled softly. "Can I whisper again?" Hannah nodded and led her back. Shadow was already sitting when they arrived. His body tensed the moment he saw the yellow coat. Then something remarkable happened. He stood. Not slowly. Not cautiously. He walked directly to the bars. Lena dropped to her knees. "I missed you," she whispered. Shadow let out a single, soft huff. Then he sat, his chest pressed to the bars. Lena reached in and rested her hand on the floor beside his paw. This time, Shadow leaned his nose down and touched her fingers. Hannah took a photo of the moment quietly, knowing she might never witness something like that again. Later, she sent the photo to the shelter director with one sentence. "The ghost dog wants to live." After that second visit, things began to move faster. Hannah updated Shadow's file again that evening. The words came to her more easily now, each one feeling like a small confirmation of what she'd sensed the moment he looked at that girl. He wanted to try. Shadow began following people's movements from inside the kennel. Not frantically or fearfully, just with interest. His posture shifted. Instead of curling inward, he lay more open, occasionally turning to face the kennel door. For the first time, he wagged his tail, once. Barely noticeable. But Hannah saw it. So did Lena, during her next visit. The shelter vet scheduled a temperament reassessment. On Thursday morning, Hannah entered isolation 3 with the leash. This moment always made her nervous. Some dogs, even calm ones, had hidden triggers. Sudden panic. Bolting. Snapping. It was impossible to know for sure until you tried. She knelt beside Shadow's kennel. "Okay, buddy. Just like we practiced." He didn't flinch when she opened the gate. He didn't run. His body stayed low, ears slightly down, but his eyes were clear. She looped the leash slowly, gently over his head. No tension. No resistance. Shadow took a hesitant step forward. Then another. They walked out of isolation into the main hallway. The sounds of barking, phones, footsteps, it was a lot. Shadow paused, ears flicking back and forth. He lowered himself close to the ground. Hannah waited. No rush. She crouched down beside him. "You're okay. We're just walking." He looked at her, then stood. Together, they moved through the hallway. In the evaluation room, the vet, Dr. Simmons, sat calmly, clipboard in hand. Hannah walked Shadow in and sat cross-legged on the floor beside him. Dr. Simmons called the dog's name gently. "Shadow." The dog looked at her. Not long, but it was contact. "He responds to his name," she noted. She extended a flat hand. "Can I say hello?" Shadow watched her. He didn't move toward her, but he didn't retreat either. After a moment, he sniffed once, then turned his head slightly. "Defensive, not fearful," she murmured. "No teeth, no growl. Calm under pressure." She took out a soft treat and placed it gently on the ground. Shadow hesitated. Looked at Hannah. She nodded. "It's okay." He stepped forward and took it. After 20 minutes, the evaluation ended. Dr. Simmons gave a quiet smile. "He's not ready for open adoption, but he's not unreachable. He's holding on to something." Hannah looked at Shadow, who was now laying quietly beside her foot. "He's holding on to her." That afternoon, Hannah called the number Lena's mother had left. "She's been talking about him nonstop," the mother said. "She even started sleeping with a stuffed black dog at night. That hasn't happened since her dad." There was a pause. "You don't have to answer this," Hannah said gently, "but may I ask what happened?" The mother's voice cracked. "Car accident. 2 years ago this week. She was with him when it happened. EMT said she was whispering to him until they arrived." Silence. "She hasn't connected with anyone like she connected with that dog." Hannah exhaled. "Then maybe we try something small. A walk. A visit. Just the two of them." There was another pause. Then, softly, "Okay." They scheduled the meeting for Saturday morning. Hannah had been prepping Shadow gently, taking him on short walks through the empty kennel wings, allowing him to get used to the leash, the door sounds, the open sky. He was slow, but never resistant. He stopped often, but always started moving again. The morning Lena arrived, he stood waiting by the gate. It was the first time he'd ever anticipated someone. She wore the same yellow coat. Her boots were newer this time. Cleaner. Hannah opened the kennel, leash already clipped. Shadow stepped forward without cue. Lena crouched and opened her arms just a little, not touching, just offering space. He walked straight to her. No pause. No hesitation. They took a walk down the fenced outdoor path behind the shelter. Snow still blanketed the grass, but the sky had cleared for the first time all week. Shadow walked slowly, nose close to the snow, then to Lena's boots. He kept beside her the entire time. She talked softly as they walked. No one could hear her clearly. Not even her mother. But Hannah noticed something else. Shadow's tail wagged. Twice. At the end of the path, Lena knelt beside him and whispered one more time. This time, Shadow did something none of them expected. He ran. Not away. Not wildly. But forward, toward the far corner of the fenced yard, and then back. A burst of movement. Ears up. Tongue out. His first play motion since arriving. Lena laughed, an open, free sound the staff had never heard from her before. She ran after him. And for those few seconds, the two of them, quiet girl and ghost dog, moved together like they'd known each other forever. Hannah stood at the edge of the enclosure, watching them. Shadow's dark form against the white snow, Lena's yellow coat like a soft splash of sunlight trailing behind him, the contrast was almost poetic. She had witnessed dozens of adoptions, hundreds of visitors, but this wasn't adoption. Not yet. It was something older, slower. Something like healing. After 20 minutes of gentle play and quiet connection, Lena walked back to the bench along the fence. Shadow followed, sitting beside her like it was routine. Like he'd always known she'd be there. "He listens when I talk," she said softly, stroking his back with her gloved hand. "But only if I whisper." Hannah nodded. Some dogs get overwhelmed by noise. Whispering might feel safer to him. Lena glanced down at Shadow, who was now resting his head on her lap. Or maybe it's how he talks, too. The girl's mother, standing beside Hannah, spoke for the first time. She used to whisper to her dad when he was asleep in the hospital. For hours. Even when no one thought he could hear. Hannah's throat tightened. Maybe Shadow's been asleep for a while too. The session ended without a word. Lena stood slowly, dusted snow from her coat, and walked with Shadow back to the kennel area. He didn't resist. He moved as if he understood what was expected. At the door, Lena knelt again. Shadow sat facing her. "I'll come back," she said. His ears perked. "I promise." Then she stood, turned, and walked away. This time, Shadow stayed standing at the gate. The shelter wasn't used to holding dogs like him this long. Normally, dogs that showed no adoption potential after 2 weeks were reassessed and decisions made. But Hannah had quietly moved Shadow's file to her desk drawer. He had no deadline. Dr. Simmons stopped by one morning. We have 3 new arrivals and only 2 open kennels. I'll take one into my office, Hannah said quickly. You sure? Yes. And the ghost dog? He stays. Dr. Simmons didn't argue. She'd seen what everyone had. Shadow wasn't fading anymore. He was waiting. Over the next few weeks, Lena visited every Saturday. Shadow's progress was gradual, but real. He began responding to more than just whispers. A low voice from Hannah, a familiar step from a volunteer, he started recognizing people. One afternoon, a loud bark from a nearby dog made Lena flinch. Shadow stepped in front of her instinctively, his tail low but steady. Protective. Present. In therapy, Lena's counselor noticed a shift. She's still quiet, the counselor told the mother. But she's asking more questions. Initiating contact. Mentioning future plans. That's new. The mother smiled softly. She's thinking about bringing him home. Bringing Shadow home, however, was no small matter. He still had challenges, nervousness around sudden movement, deep fear of enclosed spaces like crates, and a strong need for routine. And Lena's family had limited space. A small apartment. No yard. We're on the 2nd floor, the mother explained. Not ideal. But, we'll make it work. For her. Hannah hesitated. She wanted the best for Shadow. But more than that, she wanted what was right. Let's try a home visit, she said. See how he responds to the space. Just a trial. The shelter board approved a temporary 48-hour foster. It would be the first night Shadow had spent outside a kennel in over a month. That Friday, Hannah helped load Shadow into the back seat of the car. He resisted for a moment at the open door, then Lena whispered something from the passenger seat, and he stepped up. The ride was quiet. He lay down and placed his head in her lap. The mother didn't speak until they were 3 blocks from home. You know, she said softly, I think you were meant to find each other. Lena didn't answer. But she nodded. Their apartment was small, a 2-bedroom with creaky floorboards and aging heat radiators. But it was warm. Lived in. Shadow sniffed everything. Each room. Each corner. Not frantic, just curious. When he reached the living room, he paused in front of a low shelf. On it sat a photo, a smiling man in military uniform, crouched beside a much younger Lena. Shadow stared. Lena walked up behind him. That's my dad. Shadow slowly lay down beside the shelf. Then placed his head flat on the floor. The mother watched, silent. That night, he didn't bark. He didn't pace. He curled on a folded blanket at the foot of Lena's bed and slept. In the middle of the night, the mother peeked into the room. Lena was asleep, hand hanging down from the mattress. Shadow lay with his nose touching her fingertips. Morning came quietly. The apartment held that special kind of stillness that only exists right before sunrise. A dim golden hue seeped in through the blinds, illuminating the dust particles in the air. Lena stirred, her hand still dangling off the bed. Shadow was already awake. His eyes were open, ears perked slightly. But he didn't move. He had stayed exactly where he was, watching, guarding, waiting. At 6:15 a.m., Lena blinked and stretched. Her fingers brushed against Shadow's muzzle, and she smiled in that barely awake, dreamlike way children do. Morning, she whispered. Shadow let out a soft exhale, then stood and stretched beside the bed. He padded quietly into the hallway, sniffing lightly at the air. The mother was already awake in the kitchen. Coffee brewed in a small drip machine. She moved gently, not wanting to disturb the peace. When she turned around, Shadow was standing behind her. Watching. Oh, she said quietly, startled but not afraid. Hey, Bud. She crouched slowly, hand palm up. He stepped forward, sniffed her fingertips, then sat. No growl. No tail wag. Just calm acknowledgement. She smiled. We're gonna be okay, huh? Later that morning, Lena and her mother prepared for their day, Lena with her book bag, her mother with her work satchel. Shadow circled the small living room, mildly anxious about the movement and change in energy. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Shadow froze. Lena stepped beside him. It's just school, she whispered. I'll be back. You're safe here. She stroked the fur behind his ear. You don't have to run anymore. Her mother hesitated at the doorway, watching as Shadow settled himself slowly onto the rug by the window. They left. Shadow didn't bark. At work, Lena's mother couldn't concentrate. She called Hannah. He's quiet, she said. Too quiet. Is that okay? Hannah reassured her. That's how he processes. As long as he's not pacing, whining, or harming anything, he's just adjusting. Still, the mother took an early lunch and drove home to check in. When she opened the door, Shadow was still lying on the rug. The blanket Lena had draped over a chair was now pulled onto the floor, crumpled into a shape just his size. He blinked at her, lifted his head, and laid it back down. No panic. Just presence. That evening, when Lena returned home, she dropped her book bag and sank to her knees beside him. You waited, she whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once against the rug. Saturday came, and with it, Hannah's scheduled check-in visit. She arrived mid-morning with a clipboard and some paperwork, unsure of what to expect. Shadow had done well at the shelter, but new environments often brought out unexpected fears. But when the door opened, he came trotting to the front hallway, not with exuberance, but with recognition. She knelt. Hey, ghost dog. Shadow approached, rested his head briefly on her knee, then sat. Hannah smiled. I guess you're not a ghost anymore. She spent the next hour observing how Shadow responded to kitchen noises, how he moved through the apartment when someone walked too fast or dropped a shoe. He startled a few times, but never retreated fully. He never sought isolation. Most important, he followed Lena everywhere she went, quietly, patiently. When Lena dropped a glass of juice and instinctively flinched, Shadow stepped between her and the shattered cup, tail low, posture still. See, she whispered. You're not scared either. Hannah completed the form on her clipboard. Candidate shows strong, specific bonding to child. Accepts secondary humans with calm reserve. No aggression or resource guarding observed. Still nervous with sudden sound. Recommend routine, gentle environment. She paused before checking the final box. Approved for adoption. The mother blinked when she saw the paper. Wait, this fast? Hannah smiled. He's already home. We're just making it official. 2 days later, back at the shelter, Shadow's name tag was removed from the kennel gate. The staff gathered in the break room for a quiet little celebration, a picture of Shadow with Lena tacked onto the bulletin board beneath the word, adopted. Hannah stood staring at the photo a little longer than the others. Strange, she said. We thought he wouldn't make it. Dr. Simmons, sipping tea beside her, nodded. Turns out he was just waiting for the right whisper. That evening, Lena wrote something in her notebook, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Shadow, who now dozed in his favorite corner near the radiator. Her mother peeked over her shoulder. At the top of the page, in soft cursive. What you said to me first. Then a poem. You didn't bark, or cry, or run. You only looked, and that was enough. I saw you in the quiet light. Your shadow shaped like hope at dusk. And when I whispered soft and low, you lifted up your head to me. I didn't know what you had lost. but something said you understood. Her mother read the words, blinked slowly, and closed the notebook without saying a word. Weeks passed. Snow melted into slush, then disappeared altogether, revealing the weary brown of early spring. Lena's yellow coat was replaced by a light blue hoodie. Shadow's fur was glossier now, his gait more confident. And yet, something quieter had changed too, not just on the outside, but in the way he carried himself, in how he listened. Shadow now recognized the rhythm of footsteps in the apartment hallway. He knew the squeak of Lena's closet door, the soft tone her mother used when she read aloud from the news. He knew the chime of the microwave, the sound of shampoo being pumped from the bottle, and the wind that made the old windows rattle. He wasn't just living in the apartment anymore, he was part of its atmosphere. One morning, as Lena got ready for school, her mother reached into the hall closet and pulled out an old box labeled Dad's Things. It had been untouched since the accident. "I think it's time," she said. Lena didn't answer at first, just stared at the box. Shadow stood beside her, brushing lightly against her leg. "Okay," Lena said at last. They opened the box slowly, an old leather jacket, a service medal, a worn-out wristwatch that had stopped at 311. But what caught Lena's attention was a folded piece of cloth, her father's scarf. Faded green, the fibers worn thin in places. She held it up. "He wore this when he carried me in the snow once. I remember, he used to say something when I was cold." Shadow stepped closer, sniffed the scarf. Then something changed. His body stiffened slightly. He leaned in and licked the fabric once, then turned toward the front door and sat. Lena looked at her mother. "Did you see that?" Her mother nodded slowly. "He remembers something." That afternoon, Lena brought out an old photo album. She hadn't touched it in over a year. Page after page of her father holding her, or standing in uniform, or crouching beside a dog, a black Labrador. Lena froze. "Mom, this dog." Her mother leaned in. The photo was taken during a training exercise. Her father knelt in the snow beside a dog almost identical to Shadow. "That's Duke," her mother whispered. "Your dad's unit dog. He talked about him all the time." Lena stared at Shadow. "But Duke would be." Her mother nodded. "Gone by now. But maybe Shadow knew a dog like him." Lena closed the album. "He's not Duke," she said quietly. "But I think he remembers what Duke meant." Over the next few days, Shadow became restless in a way they hadn't seen since before the adoption. He wasn't panicked, but his sleep became lighter. He paced at night, not nervously, but with intention. He spent more time by the window, head tilted slightly, as though listening for something outside. Then one evening, while Lena was doing homework and her mother was on a call, Shadow walked over to the scarf lying on the table. He pulled it down gently with his teeth, carried it to his blanket in the living room, and lay on top of it. Lena's mother stopped mid-sentence when she saw. "I think he's processing grief," she said softly. Lena nodded. "Like me." The next day, Lena took the scarf on their morning walk. They went to the nearby park, a quiet strip of trees and benches behind the school. The ground was soft with thaw, and spring buds dotted the edges of branches. Lena held the scarf close and walked in silence. Shadow sniffed the air, then paused at the base of a tree and sat. Lena sat beside him and whispered, "He used to say, stay where it's warm, even when the world gets cold." Shadow laid his head on her lap. That was when Lena cried for the first time in months. Not a sobbing cry. Not the gasping grief of a funeral. But a quiet, steady stream of tears, warm and slow, the kind that leaves space for breathing. Shadow stayed still the entire time. That evening, Lena pulled out her notebook again. This time she wrote, "He didn't save me by barking. He didn't lead me through a storm. He saved me by staying still. When the silence got too loud." and that's how I know he remembers things, even if they're not his own. They framed one of the pictures from her father's album, not the one with the dog, but one where he was holding Lena as a toddler in front of a snow-covered field. They placed it on the wall above Shadow's blanket. And Shadow, whether by instinct or recognition, curled beneath it every night afterward. At school, Lena began participating in class again. She asked to join the poetry group. She volunteered to read aloud. Her voice remained soft, but the hesitation had faded. Her therapist noticed. Her teachers noticed. When asked what changed, Lena simply said, "I have someone who understands when I whisper." The piece they had built was quiet, layered, and carefully held together like a glass sculpture balanced on a shelf, beautiful, but fragile. By mid-April, the rhythms of Lena's life had changed. There were no more whispered bedtime fears, no sudden flinches when doors creaked. She began to speak to Shadow more openly, sometimes out loud, sometimes with that same soft whisper they both seemed to understand. He still preferred the whispers. But he no longer needed them to feel safe. One Friday afternoon, Lena's school announced a class trip to the local museum. It would be the first time she'd gone anywhere outside her routine since the accident. Her mother hesitated, unsure if Lena was ready. But Lena looked at her and said, "He'll still be here when I get back." It wasn't a question. That morning, Shadow watched her leave with the same quiet posture he'd always shown. No whining, no pacing. But he did stay by the door longer than usual. When she was gone, he walked the apartment twice, sniffed at her desk, then lay near the radiator. Everything seemed fine, until the noise started. A utility crew had arrived unexpectedly on the street below. Within minutes, the air filled with pounding drills, clanging metal, shouting voices, and the deep growl of heavy equipment. To anyone else, it was just construction. Inconvenient. Loud. But for Shadow, the vibrations in the walls and ground were something else entirely. His ears flattened. His breathing quickened. He stood and paced, circling the couch, then the hall, then Lena's room. He couldn't find her. He barked once, sharp, confused, then stopped himself. He pawed the window and looked down. Strange people. Strange machines. No Lena. He lay down again. Then got up. Then circled again. When Lena's mother returned from the grocery store an hour later, she found Shadow sitting in the middle of the living room, staring at the door. He wasn't panicked. But he wasn't calm either. She dropped the bags and sat on the floor. "Hey, you okay, buddy?" He looked at her, then back at the door. She noticed the trembling in his back legs. Subtle. Controlled. He didn't trust the noise. She walked to the window, drew the blinds, turned on the radio softly, a station that played instrumental piano music. Then she sat back down beside him and whispered, "It's okay. She's coming back. She always does." Shadow exhaled through his nose and lay down beside her. His body still buzzed with tension, but he didn't move away. Later that afternoon, Lena burst through the front door with a lanyard full of stickers and a museum pamphlet. "I brought him a keychain," she called out. Shadow stood immediately. His tail wagged, a full wag this time. He walked quickly to her and nudged her backpack, sniffing at the unfamiliar scents. "You okay?" she asked him, already sensing the leftover energy in his body. Her mother explained the noise. The pacing. The door watching. Lena knelt and pulled the scarf from the shelf. She wrapped it lightly around her wrist and whispered, "I'm not gone. Just away sometimes." Shadow pressed his head into her shoulder and stayed there. That night, Lena placed the keychain on his blanket. It was a miniature version of a compass. "Now you'll always know where I am," she whispered. Shadow curled around it as he slept. The next day, Hannah called to check in. "How's the noise sensitivity?" she asked. "Still there," Lena's mother replied. "But he's learning. He doesn't panic, just scans. That's progress. Want me to bring a desensitization audio track? It's something we used with a storm-traumatized dog a few months back." "That would be great." Hannah visited with a speaker and a USB drive full of recorded construction sounds. Soft at first, then gradually louder. She explained the steps: play for 5 minutes. Pause. Reward calm behavior. Repeat daily. It wasn't a perfect science, but it helped. Shadow listened the first time, alert but unmoving. His eyes tracked the speaker like it might attack. But Lena sat beside him, holding the scarf, whispering now and then. After 3 days, he barely blinked at the mid-volume rumbles. By the end of the week, he slept through the drills. On Sunday, Lena's mom asked if she wanted to visit the shelter again, not to adopt, but to donate toys and blankets. Lena lit up. They packed a small box of folded fleece, some unopened cans, and 2 squeaky toys Shadow never touched. At the shelter, Hannah greeted them with open arms. "He looks amazing," she said, crouching to greet Shadow. Shadow nudged her hand and sat. "Still prefers quiet, huh?" Lena nodded. "But he knows when he's safe." While Lena and her mother walked through the kennels, Shadow paused in front of a young pit mix pacing nervously in his cage. The dog barked once. Shadow didn't react. Instead, he stood still, ears forward, and let the dog approach the bars. He didn't move away. He didn't growl. He just stood there, quiet and present. Lena watched with wide eyes. "He remembers," she whispered. By early May, the apartment felt different. Lighter. Like the air itself had softened. Shadow had stopped flinching at the radiator. He no longer watched the door obsessively when Lena left for school. He didn't follow her from room to room with the same silent urgency. He knew she'd come back. He believed in her return now. Lena, for her part, had grown bolder. She spoke more at school, offered help in class, and even asked her teacher if she could give a short presentation about Shadow. When her teacher asked, "What makes him special?" Lena paused for only a second. "He listens to things other people miss." That Saturday morning, Lena and her mother took Shadow to the open park near the lake, not the small patch behind the school, but a wider green space filled with joggers, kites, and dogs on long leashes. It was their first time venturing into such a public place with him. Shadow stepped out of the car slowly, his nails clicking softly on the pavement. His ears swiveled at every sound: a child laughing, a car door slamming, the flapping of a plastic bag caught in a tree. But he didn't freeze. He looked back at Lena and followed. She held the leash loosely. He walked at her side, always glancing up to make sure she was still there. "He doesn't pull," her mother remarked, impressed. Lena smiled. "He just wants to walk with me, not ahead of me." Near the edge of the park, there was a quiet bench shaded by young trees just starting to bloom. They sat together, Lena, her mother, and Shadow. It was warm for the first time in weeks, and the breeze carried a mix of fresh-cut grass and the soft scent of lake water. Lena looked out over the open space and said, "He never would have made it in the shelter. Not without someone who talked like he listened." Her mother nodded. "And you never would have made it out of that silence if you hadn't found him." They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to. Shadow rested with his chin on Lena's foot, eyes half closed, completely still. As people walked by, strollers, cyclists, laughing couples, Shadow watched but did not react. A golden retriever barked at him from across the path. He looked, but stayed grounded. Lena took out her notebook again. This time, she wrote just 3 lines. "He doesn't guard me from danger. He guards me from disappearing. And I guard him from forgetting." Later that evening, while sorting old boxes in her closet, Lena found something she hadn't touched in nearly 2 years, a voice recorder. Small, palm-sized, with a cracked plastic case. She clicked play. The first sound was muffled, then a soft voice, her own, much younger, whispering something into the mic. "Stay warm, Daddy. I'm not scared if you're here." Then silence. Then a faint gasp. A nurse calling her name. She clicked it off and sat in the dark. Shadow patted in a moment later, ears forward. She didn't speak. She placed the recorder down in front of him. He sniffed it. Then lay down and pressed his paw against it, gently. She whispered, "You don't have to understand the words. Just the feeling." He stayed there all night. The next morning, they walked to the corner store for milk. A boy on a skateboard rolled past too quickly and clipped Lena's elbow by accident. She stumbled. Before she could even call out, Shadow had moved in front of her, not growling, not lunging, but blocking. Just enough. The boy apologized and skated off. Lena looked at Shadow and smiled. That was a good whisper. That night, they sat by the window together. The city glowed outside in soft orange light. A bus rolled by. Shadow didn't move. He watched the reflections flicker in the glass. Lena rested her head on his back and whispered, "You can sleep now. I've got you too." In therapy the next day, Lena brought Shadow. The therapist asked if he was a service dog. "No," Lena said simply. "He's just my memory keeper." The therapist tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means, when I don't want to feel something, he remembers it for me. And when he forgets how to be brave, I remember for him." Shadow sat calmly at her side, unmoving. Later that week, they were invited to the school assembly to present about the bond between children and rescued animals. Lena, shy as ever, stepped onto the small stage holding her notebook. She didn't read directly from it. She just said, "Sometimes, dogs don't bark. And sometimes, people don't cry. But that doesn't mean they don't feel anything. It just means they're waiting for someone who understands the quiet." The auditorium was silent. Then a wave of soft applause. Shadow stood at the side of the stage, leash loose, tail still. But when Lena stepped down, he moved toward her and pressed his head into her hip. She whispered, "You did great." So did he. The summer crept in slowly, not with heat, but with change. The city warmed, the sun stayed longer, and the breeze carried smells of blooming gardens, barbecues, and asphalt. Inside their apartment, life had taken on a gentle rhythm. Mornings with soft cereal crunches and sleepy yawns. Afternoons of school, walks, and neighborhood greetings. Evenings of whispers and shared silence beneath the hum of ceiling fans. Shadow had found his place in this world, not as a pet, not as a rescued dog, but as something quieter. He was a presence. A tether. The kind of soul that doesn't fill a space, but grounds it. It was a Thursday afternoon when the storm rolled in, unexpected, thick, and fast. Clouds towered over the skyline by 3 p.m., and by 3:30, rain pounded the city like a warning. Lena's school let out just as the worst hit. Thunder shook windows, lightning lit the sidewalks white. Lena's mother stood at the window, phone in hand. "Buses are delayed," she muttered. Shadow paced once, then stood at the door. He wasn't panicked, but alert, ears up, tail steady. Watching. "She's okay," her mother whispered, mostly to herself. But Shadow stayed by the door. At 4:12 p.m., Lena stepped into the apartment, soaked to her socks, hair clinging to her cheeks. She didn't even get her backpack off before Shadow ran to her, pressing his body against her legs, tail low and constant. "I'm okay," she whispered, dropping to her knees. Thunder boomed. Shadow didn't flinch. But Lena did. Just a little. He leaned in closer. She pressed her forehead to his and breathed deeply. They changed into dry clothes. Her mother made soup. The storm rattled the walls and tugged at the window frames, but inside, the apartment was still. Shadow lay curled near the door, ears twitching at every crack of thunder. Lena sat beside him, reading aloud from a book about lost cities and ancient dogs that guided people through fog and fire. "Dogs who remember the way," she said, "even when no one else does." Shadow closed his eyes. That night, just before bed, the power flickered and went out. No lights. No Wi-Fi. No hum of the fridge. The apartment fell into deep silence, broken only by rain. Lena's mother lit a candle and placed it on the windowsill. "It'll come back," she said. Lena sat beside Shadow, who was now sitting upright, his body tense. She whispered, "You don't have to protect me from the dark. It's okay to sleep." He didn't move. So she picked up the blanket from the couch, the same one he had dragged to his spot months ago, and draped it over both of them. She curled up beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. Her mother watched from the hallway. "This is what rescue looks like," she whispered. An hour later, the power returned with a soft click. The ceiling fan began spinning, and the fridge hummed back to life. But Lena and Shadow didn't move. They were asleep, side by side, beneath the blanket. The next morning was clear. Sunlight spilled across the floor, golden and gentle. Lena blinked awake and sat up. Shadow stretched beside her and gave a soft huff. "Thanks for staying with me," she said. He nudged her knee. That afternoon, the shelter held its annual rescue reunion event, a picnic for families who had adopted dogs in the past year. Hannah had invited them months ago, and now the date had arrived. The park was bright and filled with activity. Tables with treats, photo booths with props, volunteers handing out goodie bags. Dozens of adopted dogs, tails wagging, weaving between legs and sniffing old friends. Shadow stood by Lena's side, scanning the crowd. He wasn't anxious. Just alert. Lena kept her hand loosely on the leash. They walked the perimeter first, giving him time to adjust. He sniffed another dog, a graying beagle, and moved on. A toddler dropped a toy. Shadow paused, waited, then kept walking. They approached a table where Hannah was handing out certificates. When she looked up and saw them, her face lit up. "You made it." Lena smiled shyly. "He did." Hannah crouched and scratched behind Shadow's ears. "You look like a completely different dog." Shadow licked her hand once. Hannah handed Lena a certificate. "To Shadow, for remembering what trust feels like." Lena looked at it for a long moment. Then handed it to her mom. "I don't need paper to remember him." Later, Lena sat on a bench beneath a shady oak tree, Shadow lying beside her. Around them, laughter and barking and the hum of summer. She whispered, "You don't need to be afraid of storms anymore." "I'm not going anywhere." Shadow didn't respond. He just placed his paw over hers. That night, back at the apartment, Lena hung the certificate on the wall anyway, beside the picture of her father and the old photo album. Underneath, she wrote in pencil, "Some dogs bark. Some just stay." It was June now. The last day of school had come and gone. Lena's backpack hung loosely on the wall, untouched for days. The calendar was empty, no assignments, no therapy appointments, no doctor visits. Just summer. Lazy, slow summer. Shadow loved it. He basked in the stillness of it, stretching himself long across sun-warmed floors. He followed the morning light as it moved from window to couch. He stopped checking the door every time Lena left the room. Now, he waited with patience instead of fear. He knew she'd return. And she always did. One quiet afternoon, Lena's mother stepped into the room holding an envelope. She wore that strange, careful expression, the one adults wore when delivering delicate news. "This came today." Lena looked up from the floor where she was drawing. "What is it?" "It's from the Veterans Center. About your dad." Lena set down her pencil slowly. Shadow, lying beside her, immediately lifted his head and placed it on her knee. Her mother sat beside them. "They're creating a memorial wall in the city for soldiers who passed in service or were injured in active duty. They're asking if we'd like to add his name and a message." Lena stared at the envelope for a moment. Then she said, "Okay. But only if I can write it." That evening, Lena sat at the small desk in her room, her feet tucked beneath her, the window cracked open just enough to let in the summer wind. Shadow lay by the door, his eyes never leaving her. She wrote slowly. Not a poem. Not a whisper. Just a letter. For my dad. I didn't know how to keep talking to you after you left. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, I could still hear you better. But the world doesn't speak in silence. Then I met someone who does. He doesn't talk. But he remembers. And he reminds me that just because something's quiet doesn't mean it's gone. So I'll put your name on the wall. But I'll also carry your scarf. I'll hold your photo. I'll tell Shadow your stories. And I'll whisper when the world gets loud. Love. Lena. She folded the letter and tucked it into the envelope. Then she turned to Shadow. Let's take a walk. They walked past the corner store, past the school, past the alley that used to make Shadow freeze. He didn't freeze now. He sniffed once, then kept walking. At the base of the memorial wall, still under construction, were dozens of bricks already laid, each etched with a name. Lena placed the envelope in the drop box beside the plaque. A man nearby noticed the dog and nodded. Nice-looking shepherd mix. Lena smiled. He's not what he looks like. He's quieter than that. The days turn warm. Then hot. Shadow began sleeping more, long naps in the afternoon, heavier sighs in the evening. He wasn't sick. Just older, maybe. Or maybe just content. He had finally come out of the storm. One night, after the power had gone out again, briefly this time, Lena stood in her room holding a flashlight under her chin, telling Shadow a story. She called it The Dog Who Lived in a Whisper. It was about a dog no one believed in. A dog who didn't bark or run or chase balls. A dog who hid in shadows. Until one day, someone sat beside him and whispered something she didn't understand herself. And he stood up. And he followed her home. And he never stopped. Shadow lay still the whole time. Eyes closed. Tail twitching slightly. The next morning, Lena's mother woke early and found a sheet of paper tacked to the fridge. Lena's handwriting, neat and slow. Some dogs don't chase things. They wait for someone to catch up. There was a small sketch beneath the words, Shadow curled on the floor, a scarf folded beside him. Her mother smiled. Then wiped a tear from her cheek and went to put on the kettle. In late July, they returned to the shelter one last time, not to visit, but to volunteer. Lena helped reorganize the toy bins. Her mother folded towels. Shadow sat beside the newer dogs, one by one, offering his quiet company to the anxious, the barkers, the ones still waiting. One puppy wouldn't stop crying. Shadow sat outside the kennel and waited. 30 minutes. 40. An hour. Finally, the puppy stopped. Sat down. Shadow turned and walked away. Hannah watched from across the room, amazed. He trains them now, she whispered. That night, as they walked home, Lena turned to her mother and said, I don't think he saved me. Her mother paused. No? Lena shook her head. I think we saved each other from forgetting how to begin. When they reached the apartment, the lights were off. The windows open. The air still. Lena opened the door. Shadow trotted in, circled his blanket, and lay down. He didn't look for anyone. He didn't scan the room. He didn't brace. He just rested. And Lena knew. He was finally home. Not in a place, but in a person.